Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. You never really expect your marriage to go off the rails over toast and eggs. But that's how it happened. A normal Thursday. Bright morning, overcast sky outside, steam curling off her coffee mugs. Olivia had her phone in one hand and a butter knife in the other when she dropped the bomb like she was reading out a weather update. "I think we should see other people," she said, like it was something she'd just remembered to bring up. I blinked at her, waiting for the punchline. She glanced up briefly, then back down at her toast. Just for a while. To shake things up. 6 years of marriage. 2 states moved through. 1 fixer-upper. No kids yet by choice. We were comfortable. Too comfortable, I guess, in her eyes. I nodded slowly. "Sure," I said. "Let's try it." I don't know why those words came out. I didn't believe them. I didn't want them. But I said them. Maybe because I was stunned. Maybe because I knew the moment I challenged her, she'd already be 5 steps ahead. And maybe because I had a gut feeling she wasn't asking. She was confessing. The rest of that morning passed like normal. She went to work at the cafe she managed, Beanie's, a little corner shop 3 blocks from our house, and I headed off to the supply yard to meet a client about lumber specs. But all day, those words echoed. We should see other people. By the time I got home, Olivia was already there, humming to herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for stir-fry. She asked about my day, smiled, even poured me a drink before I could reach for one. The only thing off was how on she was. Effortless. Relaxed. Like someone who'd already made peace with a decision and was just waiting for you to catch up. That night, I lay in bed beside her listening to the rhythm of her breathing and wondered when things had started shifting. I hadn't noticed the quiet changes until now. The later nights at the shop, the password reset on her laptop, the way she always took her phone to the bathroom lately. None of it screamed betrayal. But when you string enough small things together, the silence between them becomes its own kind of noise. Saturday morning, I offered to bring her lunch. She said not to bother. "Busy shift," she said, slipping her apron over her shoulders. "You'd be standing around bored." I smiled. "I don't mind watching you work." She laughed. "You'd get in the way." So I stayed home. But I drove past the cafe an hour later. The parking lot was half empty. No signs of a rush. No customers at the outdoor tables. Her car was there. Another car I didn't recognize, beat-up red sedan, was parked close, just a bit too aligned with hers. I didn't stop. I didn't get out. I kept driving like I was just running errands, but made a mental note of the car. I'm not the jealous type by nature. Never have been. But you don't stay married 6 years and not learn the pattern of person. And something about the rhythm was off. Later that night, I asked how the shift went. "Exhausting," she said, kicking her shoes off. Zach was late again, and the register jammed. I raised an eyebrow. "Zach." "New hire," she said casually. "Teenager. Bit clumsy but sweet. Helps close." I filed that name away. No reason to press. Not yet. We watched a movie that night. She fell asleep 20 minutes in. Her phone buzzed once. I didn't touch it. Just watched it light up and dim on the coffee table. The next morning, she left early. Said she needed to handle an inventory reorder before the cafe opened. It was Sunday. They didn't open until 10. She left at 8. I sat at the table alone, coffee cooling between my hands, wondering if she thought I was truly that slow. But the truth? I didn't want to confront her. Not yet. I want to know how far it would go. Because whatever this was, it had already started. I didn't mention the red sedan when Olivia came home that evening. I didn't mention the way she called her new hire clumsy, then told me 3 hours later that he'd reorganized the entire stockroom like a pro. I just listened, made mental notes. There was something polished about her lies now, like she'd practiced them. They rolled out too smoothly, like fact from a well-rehearsed pitch. And I knew Olivia. She didn't put that much effort into anything unless it served a purpose. That week, I started keeping track of her closing shifts. Not because I want to catch her, but because I already felt caught. Trapped in the unfamiliar version of our life, she was painting over the original one. She stayed late Tuesday, then Thursday, then again on Saturday, this time not even texting that she'd be late until well after she was supposed to be home. When she did, it was short, just got slammed. "Don't wait up." The message came through while I was putting dishes away. I stared at it for a while, then opened the shared iCloud account we'd set up years ago. We rarely used it anymore, but I knew Olivia still had automatic photo backup enabled. Just in case, she once said, when her phone nearly drowned in a bowl of soup during our second anniversary dinner. The new photo that loaded stopped me cold. A mirror selfie, taken in what looked like the cafe's back office, dim light, slightly tilted. A guy's face front and center. Young, sharp-jawed, messy hair, wearing a dark green hoodie, and Olivia's work shirt. I didn't react, not outwardly, but something inside shifted. Not rage, not even betrayal. Just a click, like a gear sliding into place. A silent confirmation that my instincts weren't off. I didn't confront her. Not that night, not the next day. I wanted to see what came next. I wanted her to keep talking. Sunday evening, we sat on the couch watching a documentary. She curled up next to me, just like she always had. Her head on my shoulder, her breath steady. But it wasn't real. Not anymore. It was a pose, one she thought would hold everything in place. Halfway through, she said, I think Jeremy has a crush on me. He glanced over. Who's Jeremy? One of the regulars, she said, smiling. Comes in every morning, always leaves an extra tip. He asked if I wanted to try his homemade scones sometime. You gonna take him up on it? She laughed, brushing a hand through her hair. Please. He's like 50, so it's harmless. I watched her as she spoke. Calm, easy, too at ease for someone who'd been caught on camera with a teenager in her uniform. She wanted me focused on Jeremy, someone twice her age, someone who sounded safe and ridiculous. A decoy. I nodded. Maybe you just like scones. Maybe, she said. Anyway, I told him I was married. Obviously. The word echoed in my head. Obviously. Like it still meant something. That night, I took a drive. Past Beanie's around closing. The lights were off in front, but I knew she sometimes stayed later to do paperwork. I circled once. The red sedan was parked out back. No other cars. I drove around the block, parked across the street, and waited. After 20 minutes, the back door opened. A figure stepped out. Not Olivia. It was the barista, Zach, I was guessing. The kid from the photo. Hoodie, earbuds, loose-limbed walk. He didn't look nervous. Didn't glance around. He just slid into the sedan and drove off like he didn't have a care in the world. A few minutes later, Olivia exited the back door. Alone. Pulled the cafe door shut, turned the lock, and headed for her car. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. At home, she slipped into bed like nothing had happened. I'm so tired, she murmured. Long night. I bet, I said. She rolled over and drifted off. I stared at the ceiling, knowing now that she'd played it smooth, too smooth. She hadn't reacted to the iCloud slip, hadn't changed the settings, hadn't even noticed, which meant this wasn't her first lie, just the first one she forgot to cover. And that meant she'd likely been at it longer than I'd guessed. But the part that kept me awake wasn't the lying. It was the strategy. Olivia wasn't cheating randomly. She was running a playbook, and I was going to flip every page until I found the last one. It was Thursday when I found the gift. Olivia had already left for her morning shift, and I was home doing weekend prep at the house, cleaning out the spare closet, rotating winter gear back into storage, and pretending to keep busy when my thoughts were anything but. I wasn't hunting for evidence, not exactly. But you start noticing the odd corners of your own house once you stop trusting what's inside them. The hallway closet was packed, mostly with coats and mismatched shoes. Olivia kept a few storage bins up top, craft supplies, old greeting cards, one labeled Holiday Overflow. When I lifted that one down to reorganize the shelf, something shifted inside, heavier than I remembered. I opened it carefully, just enough to peek in. Wrapped in gold tissue paper and tucked beside some fake snowflakes was a small black box. Not Christmas, not holiday, not accidental, just deliberate and hidden in plain sight. I unwrapped the paper slowly and opened the lid. Inside was a silver wristwatch. New, clean design, minimal face, black band. Not my brand, not my size. I don't even wear watches. But the tag was still inside, $185. And a folded note beside it read, in Olivia's handwriting, for your big weekend. You've earned this. No name, no ikachin, just that line. I closed the box and sat down on the floor for a minute, listening to the low hum of the fridge in the next room. I wasn't surprised. but I was steady. There was a kind of clarity that came with seeing the proof laid out like that. Clear, calculated, intimate. She hadn't bought a gift on impulse. She'd planned it, wrapped it, hidden it. She didn't intend for me to find it, which meant she was either about to give it to someone, or she already had and was waiting to sneak it out. I didn't shout. I didn't text her. I didn't even touch the note again. I just stared at the watch, then walked to the garage and grabbed my smallest screwdriver set. If she was going to give someone a gift, it was going to leave an impression. I loosened the watch band slightly, just enough so it wouldn't stay clasped during wear. I twisted the dial out of sync by a few hours. Then I gently pressed a pin down inside the mechanism to stop the second hand from ticking. It would still look brand new, but it wouldn't work right. Not unless someone took the time to figure it out. Not unless someone asked, "Where did this come from?" And if that conversation happened, I wanted it to carry just enough confusion to leave a mark. I rewrapped the gift exactly as I found it, slid it back into the tissue paper, box into bin back on the shelf. That night, Olivia came home in high spirits. "Zach finally learned how to use the espresso machine," she said, laughing as she kicked her shoes off. "I told him he's one step away from earning his official barista badge. Promotion incoming." "Hardly, but he's getting better." She moved around the kitchen with ease, talking about work like it was just another normal day. I stirred soup while she leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone. I didn't ask about the gift. I didn't need to. The next morning, I checked the closet again. The bin was still there, but lighter. The gift was gone. She'd taken it, and she never said a word. Saturday morning, she left earlier than usual. "Inventory audit," she called out from the front door. "Might run late." I just waved from the kitchen and kept washing the dishes. At 9:45, I parked 2 blocks from the cafe and walked around back. The red sedan was already there, her car beside it. I didn't get close. I didn't take photos. I didn't need to catch them yet. But I watched the lights inside flicker, then go dim. It wasn't the audit she was working on. It was the lie. And for now, I was going to let her keep building it, just high enough to fall from. I figured if I was going to keep following the thread, I needed to be methodical, not reactive. Olivia was careful, crafty even, but she wasn't perfect. People who think they're in control rarely are. So I started watching from a distance. Not just her, but everything around her. Her coworkers, her schedule, her tone when she talked about work. I began driving by the cafe around close, never stopping, just noting what cars were there, what lights were on, what movements I could catch through the narrow alleyway windows in the back. I kept a log on my phone, something private coded. Every time she said she'd be home by 9 and came in at 10:30, I wrote it down. Every time the red sedan showed up after hours, I logged that too. Tuesday afternoon, I stopped in for coffee, casual. She didn't expect me. I watched her from the back corner of the cafe while she moved behind the counter, laughing at something said by one of the baristas. Zach wasn't in that day, but someone else caught my eye. A guy I hadn't seen before. Mid-30s, dark beard, tall, wiry frame. He leaned in too close when he spoke to Olivia. She smiled easily, touched his arm once in passing. It looked innocent, almost. But I'd seen Olivia smile 1,000 ways. That wasn't one of the casual ones. It had weight behind it. I paid for my coffee and asked the girl at the counter, "New guy?" She smiled. "Oh, that's Andrew. He's been covering mornings since Kristen went on leave. Really nice." I nodded and left without finishing the drink. That night, I asked Olivia about him. "Andrew," she repeated. "Yeah, he's covering for Kristen for a few weeks. Super chill. Bit of a health nut." "What?" I shrugged. "Just wondering." He seemed friendly. She laughed. "He's like that with everyone. Totally harmless." I nodded, letting it drop. But I didn't believe her. So Thursday, I followed her after work. Not close enough to be noticed, just enough to stay in her blind spot. She took the long way home, which was odd. No traffic, no detours. Just an extra 10 minutes with no clear explanation. When she finally pulled into the driveway, I gave it a few minutes before going in. She was already in the kitchen, headphones in, dancing around while chopping peppers. "Long shift?" I asked, setting my keys down. She smiled. "Don't even ask." Andrew spilled an entire smoothie across the prep sink and then tried to mop it up with coffee filters. I chuckled. That sounds efficient. He's sweet but hopeless. There was again that light touch of familiarity in her voice. like someone she'd gotten used to, maybe even fond of. The next day, I stopped by the cafe again. Olivia wasn't working, but Andrew was. I watched him from the patio, sipping a bitter cup of black coffee while he wiped counters and smiled politely at customers. He was calm, methodical. I didn't see anything out of line. But when he walked to the back to grab a delivery box, I slipped inside and left a note behind the counter where Olivia's things are usually kept. It read, "How long until he figures it out?" No name, no handwriting to trace, just enough to raise a flicker of panic. That night I waited, but nothing came. She didn't mention a note, didn't act rattled, didn't seem off at all, which told me something important. It wasn't Andrew. Because if it had been, there would have been a tremble, a shift, a sudden need to check her phone or fix her schedule. But Olivia was composed, relaxed, too relaxed for someone being watched. Unless she didn't feel watched at all. I realized then that she was running a different game than I thought. Zach hadn't been replaced by Andrew. Zach had never left. And I'd been following the wrong man. Saturday afternoon, I tested the waters again. Did Andrew ever get the hang of that smoothie machine? I asked casually as she folded laundry. She smirked. Barely. He's been shadowing Zach all week, trying to keep up. I froze. Zach's training him? Yeah, it's kind of funny. Zach's only been here a couple of months, but he's already quicker than most of the team. I nodded, processing it. That was the tell. Zach wasn't just a barista. He was trusted, embedded, close. And suddenly, everything snapped into place. The late closings, the selfies, the hoodie in her laundry a week ago that she claimed was a donation item. I've been looking at the wrong people. But now I was done guessing. Next time, I'd follow her to the end. And I'd bring the truth back with me. I woke up that Monday, already knowing I wouldn't get much done. I went through the motions at work, responded to a few client emails, rescheduled one delivery, but my mind was elsewhere. Everything I'd seen so far told me something was wrong. The patterns weren't random. Olivia's movements had rhythm. Her stories had structure. It was deliberate. And the closer I watched, the more polished the lies became. Zach was the thread I dropped too soon. I went back to him now, re-examining details I'd brushed off. His car behind the cafe, the unexpected selfie synced to our shared account, the hoodie in our laundry that must have been a customer's, and the way Olivia said his name too casually, like she was trying not to think about him even as she mentioned him. The boy had slipped right past me, probably because he looked too young to be a threat. But that's exactly what made him the right kind of secret. That afternoon, I stopped by the cafe again. I didn't go in this time. I sat across the street, behind a weathered picket fence near a florist shop that had just switched out its tulips for summer arrangements. From there, I had a perfect view of the front windows. I watched Zach take 2 orders, flash a smile at a group of college girls, and disappear behind the counter. Olivia came out of the back moments later, speaking briefly to someone off camera before stepping up to the register. She didn't look toward the window. She didn't know I was watching. She leaned over Zach's shoulder once to point at something on the screen. He didn't move away, and when she turned to grab a cup, his eyes followed her like it was reflex. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept still. This wasn't proof yet. It was just confirmation that I was finally watching the right person. That night, she was in a good mood. Too good. Zach's really improving, she said over dinner. He's got the inventory routine down now. I think he's finally getting it. I nodded. Good to hear. She sipped her wine. He's kind of like a little brother, you know? All nervous energy and too many hoodies. I let that sit in the air. Right. She changed the subject before I could speak again. Do you want to go to that farmer's market this weekend? The one in Eugene? I looked up from my plate. I thought you worked weekends. I asked to switch shifts. Just felt like we needed a day. I raised an eyebrow. You've been busy lately. She tilted her head. Are you saying we've been distant? I'm saying you've been out more. She smiled. It's work, Brian. Sure. She paused, trying to read me. But I gave her nothing. That night, after she fell asleep, I checked her bag. Not to invade, just to confirm what I suspected. Inside, I found a folded piece of notebook paper. Torn edges. The handwriting wasn't hers. It read, after close. Same as last week. Don't chicken out this time. Winky face, no name, no signature. But it didn't need one. I folded it back the way I found it and left it where it was. The next day, I told the guys at work I was taking Friday off. Said I needed a mental reset. Nobody asked questions. Thursday evening, Olivia came home later than usual. Sorry, she said, dropping her bag. Last-minute cleanup. I nodded. No worries. She walked to the kitchen, took out leftovers, started humming a tune under her breath. I didn't recognize the melody, but it sounded rehearsed. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll my phone while she plated dinner. She leaned over to hand me my dish, kissed my cheek, and said, "We should do something this weekend. Just us." "Sure," I said without blinking, because I already had plans, and they didn't include pretending anymore. Friday came, and I was up before sunrise. I told Olivia I was heading out for a supply run, which wasn't technically a lie. I needed to clear my head, so I drove 2 towns over, sat in a diner for an hour, and stared at a cinnamon roll I never touched. My hands itched to do something, to move, to act, but the waiting was what mattered now. If I jumped too soon, she'd deny it, deflect, cry, or twist it back on me. I needed her caught in a moment where the lie couldn't outrun the truth. When I got back into town, I parked a block from the cafe, hidden in plain sight. Olivia's car was already there, pulled snug into her usual back spot. The red sedan showed up 10 minutes later. Zach. I recognized his silhouette as he stepped out, backward cap, that slouching walk, and a hoodie even though it was already warm. I stayed in the truck and watched him knock once on the back door. It opened quickly, too quickly, like I didn't need to knock at all. I watched them disappear inside. I looked at the time, 8:12 a.m. The cafe wouldn't open for another hour. I waited. At 8:59, the front sign flipped to open. Olivia came into view a few minutes later, arranging scones in the display. She looked composed, relaxed, like a woman who had everything under control. I couldn't stand it. That night, we had dinner like always. She lit candles, poured wine, talked about summer renovations to the cafe like we were planning them together. But I couldn't focus on her voice. I kept seeing Zach's grin from that selfie. I kept hearing the tone in her voice when she called him sweet. I kept replaying every late night she said was nothing. Halfway through dinner, I stood up and walked out to the garage. I needed air. I needed space. But really, I needed a plan. I didn't want an argument. I wanted the end. I wanted to pull the mask off with precision and leave nothing for her to hide behind. The lying was too easy for her now. She turned it into performance art. So I started researching. A competitor cafe had just posted a "now hiring, weekend help sign online." I bookmarked the listing. If Olivia wanted to play games in a coffee shop, then so would I, but on my terms. I applied for the job that night. Didn't even hesitate. Filled out the form, attached a short note, hit submit. The cafe down the street, Morning Finch, had a good reputation, friendly staff, busy weekends, clean counters. More importantly, it was close enough to Olivia's shop that I could keep her in view without standing in her shadow. I got a call the next day. Interview lasted 10 minutes. I had the job before the coffee cooled in my cup. Just like that, I became the guy behind the counter, apron tied, sleeves rolled, learning espresso ratios while watching my marriage unravel 2 blocks away. My first weekend shift felt oddly peaceful. The work kept my hands moving, and the rhythm gave me something to focus on. My new manager, Sophie, was sharp-eyed, quick with a joke, and didn't miss much. "You pick things up fast," she said during our break. I smiled and said I'd had to adapt to changing situations lately. She laughed, not knowing how close that landed. We talked more than I expected. She had a kid in school, a dog that hated rain, and a laugh that didn't sound rehearsed. It was strange how easy it was to talk to someone without watching for the spin behind every word. Between drinks, I glanced out the front window now and then. I could see Olivia's cafe across the way, the corner of her green awning just barely in view. On Sunday afternoon, I stepped out to take out the trash and paused at the alley. Her back door was cracked open. A flash of movement, 2 figures inside. One sitting, one standing too close. The standing one reached forward, touched the other's arm. Even from across the alley, I knew who it was. Zach. His hoodie, his posture, and Olivia's laugh. It floated through the gap like it had every right to be there. I didn't flinch. I didn't storm over. I just stood there until the moment passed, then walked back inside. That evening, Olivia came home humming to herself, shoes off, jacket slung across one shoulder. "Slow day," she said. Almost boring. She poured wine like she hadn't just spent an hour behind a locked office door. I sat across from her and nodded. "Glad things are quiet," I said. She smiled. "It's nice, right?" Us settling into a rhythm again. I watched her sip her drink. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt done pretending I didn't know. Let her lie. Let her believe the mask was still working. Because mine was slipping off. And I was fine with that. The job at Morning Finch came through faster than I expected. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't have to. It was a part-time weekend thing, a few shifts just to stay busy, as I phrased it when Olivia asked why I seemed more relaxed lately. She smiled, maybe even relieved. A busier husband is a quieter one. And for once, she didn't ask too many questions. I trained quietly, learned how to pull espresso without making a mess, how to fold bakery bags the way Sophie liked them, how to blend into a space without being noticed. Sophie ran a tight ship but didn't micromanage. She gave me space, trusted me quickly. It helped that I worked hard, listened, didn't talk too much. We got along without trying. She had a sharp sense of humor, and when she laughed, it sounded like someone who'd earned her joy. I hadn't heard a sound like that in a long time. Working just a few blocks away from Olivia's cafe gave me something more than a paycheck. It gave me perspective. I could see her world from the outside now. I watched her shop from the corner of my eye, noticed when her car pulled in too early or stayed too late. When she said she was closing solo, I sometimes saw Zach's car tucked behind the alley. Their brakes lined up more often than coincidence allowed. But I waited. No accusations. No half-finished confrontations. I wanted it clean, unshakable, the kind of truth that didn't need explanation. And then one Saturday, I got it. It was nearly 4 p.m. The cafe was in a lull. Sophie stepped into the back to handle inventory, and I offered to run trash out to the bins. I took the long way through the alley, not rushing, just moving with purpose. The back door to Olivia's cafe was open again. Same small wedge of space, same careless confidence. I kept walking, but slower now. I heard voices. One was hers, low, relaxed, like she was recounting a story. Then laughter. His. Zach's. Unmistakable. I paused just outside the frame of their doorway and waited. Another laugh. Then a thud, like something hit the desk or wall too hard. "Stop," Olivia's voice said, playful but firm. "Why? You said we had time." That was all I needed. I didn't move. I didn't storm in. I just stood there with my breath held, the moment carving itself into memory. I'd imagined this 100 ways. Her with someone else, the betrayal loud and obvious, but the real thing was quiet. Casual. Worse, because of how normal it sounded. I walked away before they noticed me. When I got back to Morning Finch, Sophie was checking the bakery shipment. She glanced up and said, "Everything good?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a nod. "Just needed a minute of air." "Can't blame you. It's weirdly heavy out today." I helped stock the scones and didn't say another word. That night, after I got home, Olivia was already on the couch, blanket over her legs, wine in hand. "You look beat," she said. "Long day," I replied, hanging my jacket. "You like it over there?" "Edo." She smiled. "I am glad. It's good for you. You were feeling stuck." "Yeah," I said. "I'm feeling clearer now." She patted the seat beside her. I sat down. She leaned into me like nothing was fractured, like the day hadn't happened. And for a second, I almost said it, almost looked her in the eye and asked if Zach's laugh always came that easily, or if it took time. But I didn't. Instead, I let her rest her head on my shoulder. Let her believe she was safe in her lie. Because the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. She just hadn't looked out the window yet. The hardest part of revenge is staying patient once you already know the truth. You wake up beside the person who lied to your face and think, today could be the day. But it's not. Not yet. Because timing is everything. If I'd said something when I heard Zach laugh, she would have twisted it. She'd have turned it into doubt, into overthinking, into a version of reality where I was the one slipping. But now, I didn't need her to explain anything. I just needed her to keep doing exactly what she was already doing, lying with confidence. Sophie was the first person I told anything to. Not everything, but enough. We were closing up one night after a quiet shift when I said, "Can I ask your opinion on something weird?" She looked up from the espresso machine, curious, but not nosy. "I'm married," I said slowly. 6 years. And my wife recently suggested seeing other people. Sophie blinked, then gave a short breath of disbelief. "That's a conversation." "Yeah," I said. It was more of an announcement. She didn't push, just leaned against the counter and waited. So I told her more, not names, not the specifics, but the shape of the betrayal. The boy from work, the late nights, the lies served like coffee, warm, easy, and constant. She didn't interrupt. When I was finished, she nodded and said, "You want her to know you know?" "Not yet," I said. "I want her to know I moved on first." That weekend, Sophie and I didn't talk much about it. But something had shifted. There was a new ease between us. Not flirtation, not performance, just clarity. Someone seeing me without the filter Olivia used to paint over everything. On Sunday, Sophie handed me 2 coffee sleeves before my shift ended. On one, she wrote her number. On the other, a question. "Let me help you make a scene?" I didn't answer. I just smiled. The next Thursday, Olivia mentioned that the cafe was hosting a customer appreciation week. There'd be deals, samples of photo booth, even live acoustic music. She said it casually, like it was something she dreamed up with her team. But I knew what it was, a distraction, a way to celebrate while Zach lingered just out of sight. That same day, I asked Sophie if she was free Sunday morning. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I'm sure." We walked in at 11:15, right at the peak of the rush. Olivia's cafe was buzzing. Local families, high schoolers in booths, couples standing in line. I wore my cleanest flannel. Sophie wore red. Simple, but loud enough to be noticed. We didn't hide. We walked right in, hand in hand. I could feel heads turning. People knew me, knew her, knew Olivia. Olivia was behind counter. She looked up, smiling, ready to greet the next customer, until she saw us. Her smile faltered just slightly before she recovered. "Brian." "Morning," I said. "Heard you had a big day here." Sophie leaned in, her voice just loud enough. "Can we get 2 caramel lattes and, I don't know, maybe a refund on a fake marriage?" The woman in line behind us coughed to cover a laugh. Olivia's eyes shifted to Sophie, then to our hands, then back to me. She opened her mouth, but I placed a 50 on the counter with a sticky note already attached. She read it. Her jaw tightened. It said, "Best part of being open? You can shut it anytime." I didn't wait for a response. We turned, drinks in hand, and walked out to the sound of 3 cafe regulars whispering behind us. By Monday, word had spread. Olivia didn't come home that night. On Tuesday, I heard from someone in her shop that she'd been let go for a policy violation. I didn't celebrate. I just changed the locks. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.